Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his hands as the comm system crackled to life in his repair bay. The message was brief, automated, and came through the emergency frequencies that most salvage crews ignored. Something about a derelict vessel in the Kepler 442 system broadcasting a distress signal that had been repeating for over 6 months. Most mechanics would have deleted the message immediately. Emergency calls from that sector usually meant pirates, or worse, alien technology that could fry your ship's systems just by getting too close. But Marcus had always been different from other humans. Where they saw danger, he saw puzzles that needed solving. The journey to Kepler 442 took 3 days in his modified salvage vessel, the Wrench Turner. Marcus had built her himself from scrapped Federation parts and a few components he'd borrowed from alien traders who thought humans were too primitive to understand their technology. They'd been wrong about that, as they usually were when it came to underestimating human ingenuity. The derelict ship appeared on his sensors long before he could see it with his eyes. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of any human vessel, and clearly of Zephyrian origin. Marcus recognized the flowing, organic curves that the tall, blue-skinned aliens favored in their ship designs. The Zephyrians considered themselves the most advanced species in the known galaxy, with technology that could manipulate matter at the molecular level and minds that could process information faster than most computers. What puzzled Marcus was why they'd abandon such an expensive ship in the middle of nowhere. Zephyrians didn't abandon anything valuable. Their entire culture was built around efficiency and the elimination of waste. If they'd left this ship here, broadcasting a distress signal for 6 months, something had gone very wrong. As Marcus approached the vessel, his instruments detected massive hull breaches along the port side. The ship's elegant curves were marred by what looked like claw marks, deep gouges that ran from bow to stern. Whatever had made those marks was big, and judging by the melted metal around the edges, it breathed fire. Well, that's not ominous at all, Marcus muttered to himself as he maneuvered his ship toward the least damaged docking port. The airlock cycled through its sequence with mechanical precision, confirming that whoever had built this ship knew their engineering. Marcus checked his environment suit twice before stepping aboard. The air was breathable for humans, but the temperature readings showed significant fluctuations throughout the ship. Some sections registered as freezing, while others were hot enough to cook an unprotected human in minutes. The ship's interior was everything Marcus expected from Zephyrian design. Clean lines, surfaces that seemed to flow like water frozen in time, and lighting that adjusted automatically to his presence. But there were signs of damage everywhere. Scratches on the walls, burn marks on the ceiling, and most disturbing of all, the strange way some corridors were coated in what looked like dried saliva. Marcus followed his portable scanner toward the strongest life sign readings. The signal led him deeper into the ship, past laboratories filled with equipment he couldn't begin to understand, and living quarters designed for beings much taller than humans. The Zephyrians were elegant creatures, with limbs that seemed too long for their bodies and faces that humans often found unsettling in their perfect symmetry. The life signs were coming from what his scanner indicated was the ship's cargo bay, a massive space that could have held his entire vessel. As the doors slid open, Marcus heard something that made him freeze in place. It was a sound like wind through a cave, but with an underlying note of pain that went straight to his heart. Marcus had heard wounded animals make similar noises during his childhood on the farming colonies. This was the sound of something suffering. The cargo bay was enormous, with a ceiling that stretched up into darkness. But Marcus's attention was immediately drawn to the figure in the center of the space. Chained to the floor, with restraints that looked strong enough to hold a starship, was the most magnificent creature he had ever seen. The dragon, and there was no other word for what it was, stretched nearly 40 feet from nose to tail. Its scales should have been a brilliant silver or gold, like the dragons Marcus had seen in Zephyrian art displays. Instead, they were pale white, almost translucent, with pink veins visible beneath the surface. Its eyes, which should have been bright blue or green, were a pale red that spoke of albinism. The creature's breathing was labored, and Marcus could see infected wounds along its flanks where the chains had rubbed against its hide. Its magnificent wings were folded tight against its body, but Marcus could see they were too thin, the membranes stretched and fragile-looking. Most heartbreaking of all was the way the dragon's head was held. Instead of the proud, regal bearing that dragons were known for, this one kept its head low, eyes fixed on the floor as if it had given up hope entirely. Marcus approached slowly, keeping his hands visible. He'd worked with enough alien species to know that sudden movements were rarely a good idea, especially around something with claws the size of dinner plates. "Hey there, big guy," he said softly. "I'm going to guess you didn't chain yourself up." The dragon's head lifted slightly, and Marcus got his first clear look at its face. Where a healthy dragon would have had bright, intelligent eyes full of fire and pride, this creature's gaze was dull with pain and resignation, but there was still intelligence there, and something that might have been curiosity. Marcus activated his universal translator, hoping it could handle whatever form of communication the dragon used. The device beeped as it calibrated, then projected a soft blue light that indicated it was ready. "Can you understand me?" Marcus asked. The dragon's response was a low rumble that the translator converted into heavily accented but understandable speech. "You are not Zephyrian." "No, I'm human. Name's Marcus. What's yours?" The dragon was quiet for so long that Marcus thought it might not answer. When it finally spoke, its voice carried a weariness that seemed to come from more than just physical pain. "I was called Shimmer of Stars on Water, but the Zephyrians renamed me Subject 7 Alpha when they decided I was defective." Marcus felt his jaw clench. He'd dealt with Zephyrian arrogance before, but this was something else entirely. "Defective how?" "My coloring," the dragon said, lifting one wing slightly to show the pale, translucent scales. "Dragons are meant to be beautiful, powerful, perfect representatives of our species. I am albino, a genetic flaw that brings shame to my bloodline. The Zephyrians were contracted to transport me to a research facility where my condition could be studied, but during the journey I became difficult to manage." Marcus looked around at the claw marks and burn damage throughout the ship. "I'm going to guess that's an understatement." For the first time since he'd entered the bay, the dragon's eyes showed something that might have been amusement. "I may have expressed my displeasure at their treatment. Dragons do not respond well to being caged, and albino dragons are still dragons. They decided I was too dangerous to transport and too valuable to kill outright, so they chained me here and abandoned the ship. The distress beacon was meant to attract other Zephyrians who might want to claim me as salvage." Marcus knelt down to examine the chains more closely. They were made from some kind of crystalline material that hummed with energy. Definitely Zephyrian technology, and definitely beyond anything he'd worked with before. But every lock had a key, and every system had a weakness. That was the first rule of being a good mechanic. "How long have you been here?" he asked while running his scanner over the restraints. "Approximately 173 standard days," the dragon replied. "The ship's automated systems provide minimal nutrition and water, enough to keep me alive but not enough to maintain health. I estimate I have perhaps another month before organ failure begins." Marcus's scanner beeped as it finished analyzing the chains. The readout was complicated, but the basic principle was simple enough. The restraints were powered by the ship's main energy grid and required a specific command sequence to release. The Zephyrians had been thorough, but they'd made one mistake. They'd assumed that only another Zephyrian would ever board the ship. "Well, Shimmer of Stars on Water," Marcus said, emphasizing the dragon's real name. "It looks like you're in luck. I'm not Zephyrian, which means I don't have to follow their protocols, and I happen to be really good at breaking things that aren't supposed to be broken." The dragon raised its head fully for the first time, and Marcus could see hope beginning to flicker in those pale red eyes. "You would free me? But I am defective." The Zephyrians made that very clear. Marcus stood up and met the dragon's gaze directly. "Where I come from, we've got a saying, different doesn't mean broken, and from where I'm standing, you look like a dragon who's been treated badly by people who should have known better. That's not a defect. That's injustice, and humans have a real problem with injustice." The dragon was quiet for a long moment, then spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "Why would you help me? Your species and mine have never had formal contact. You gain nothing from my freedom." Marcus smiled, even though he knew the dragon probably couldn't interpret human facial expressions correctly. "Maybe that's exactly why I'm helping. Humans don't always need a reason to do the right thing. Sometimes we just do it because it needs doing." He turned back to his scanner readout and began formulating a plan. The chains were tough, but the ship's systems were Zephyrian, elegant, efficient, and completely dependent on their central control network. If he could access the ship's main computer, he might be able to convince it that the dragon was being released by authorized personnel. "This is going to take some work," Marcus said, pulling tools from his kit. "But I've got good news. I brought sandwiches. And I've got better news. I've never met a computer system I couldn't sweet-talk into doing what I wanted." As he began working on the access panel near the bay's entrance, Marcus could feel the dragon's eyes following his every movement. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of other creatures that had been abandoned or mistreated. It was the look of someone who wanted to hope, but was afraid of being disappointed again. Marcus had no intention of disappointing anyone today. The Zephyrians might consider themselves the most advanced species in the galaxy, but they'd clearly never met a human mechanic with a grudge and a full toolkit. By the time he was done with their fancy ship, they'd have a very different opinion about human ingenuity. The first step was understanding exactly what he was dealing with. And from the looks of things, he was dealing with a dragon who'd been written off as defective by people who wouldn't recognize real value if it bit them on their perfectly symmetrical faces. Marcus grinned as he began splicing into the ship's control systems. This was going to be interesting. Marcus had been working for 6 hours straight when he finally cracked the ship's security protocols. The Zephyrian computer system was more complex than anything he'd encountered, but it followed logical patterns that he could trace once he understood their basic approach to data architecture. The key had been realizing that Zephyrians built their systems like their art, everything connected to everything else in flowing organic patterns. "Got it," he announced, wiping sweat from his forehead as the access panel finally accepted his modified command sequence. "Your people really don't believe in making things simple, do they?" Shimmer of Stars on Water had been watching Marcus work with growing fascination. The human's approach to problem-solving was unlike anything the dragon had observed during his time with the Zephyrians. Where they would have used sophisticated scanning equipment and precise calculations, Marcus relied on intuition, trial and error, and what he called mechanical empathy, the ability to understand how a system wanted to work. "The Zephyrians believe that complexity demonstrates superiority," the dragon replied. "A simple solution is considered crude, even if it is more effective." Marcus laughed as he began uploading his bypass program into the ship's main computer. "Yeah, I've noticed that about a lot of advanced species. They get so caught up in showing off how smart they are that they forget the whole point is to actually solve problems." The crystalline chains around the dragon's limbs began to pulse with a different rhythm as Marcus's program took effect. Instead of the steady blue glow that had maintained the restraints for months, the crystals now flickered between blue and amber as the ship's computer processed conflicting instructions. "It's working," the dragon said, wonder creeping into his voice. I can feel the grip loosening. "Don't get too excited yet," Marcus warned, his fingers flying over the control interface. "I need to make sure the release sequence is gradual. These chains are tied into the ship's structural integrity system. If they all release at once, the feedback could damage the power grid and leave us stranded." This was the part that required real finesse. Marcus had to convince the computer that it was releasing the restraints as part of a planned maintenance cycle, not because of unauthorized tampering. The Zephyrians had built multiple redundancies into their security systems, but they'd never anticipated someone who would approach the problem from a completely different philosophical angle. 20 minutes later, the first chain disengaged with a soft chime. The restraint around the dragon's left foreleg opened like a flower, retracting into the floor with mechanical precision. Shimmer of Stars on Water flexed his newly freed limb carefully, wincing as circulation returned to areas that had been compressed for months. "How does it feel?" Marcus asked, already working on the sequence for the next restraint. "Strange," the dragon admitted. "I had almost forgotten what it was like to move freely. Even this small freedom feels overwhelming." Marcus paused his work to study the dragon's reaction. He'd seen similar responses in rescue animals back on Earth, creatures that had been confined for so long that liberty itself became frightening. "We'll take it slow," he said gently. "There's no rush now." The second chain released an hour later, followed by the third and fourth in careful sequence. With each freed limb, the dragon's posture began to change. His head rose higher, his wings shifted slightly, and most importantly, the dull resignation in his eyes was slowly being replaced by something brighter. When the final restraint released, Shimmer of Stars on Water remained perfectly still for several minutes. Marcus watched patiently, understanding that this moment needed to belong entirely to the dragon. Finally, Shimmer of Stars on Water rose to his full height. Even weakened by months of confinement and poor nutrition, he was magnificent. His pale scales caught the bay's lighting in ways that created subtle rainbows across their surface, and his movements had a grace that spoke of eons of evolutionary refinement. "I am free," the dragon said, his voice filled with an emotion that the translator struggled to convey. "After all this time, I am actually free." "Free as far as the law's concerned," Marcus agreed. "But we're not done yet. You're hurt, and this ship isn't exactly set up for dragon healthcare. We need to get you somewhere safe where you can heal properly." The dragon turned those pale red eyes on Marcus with an expression of profound curiosity. "You continue to surprise me, human Marcus. First you free me when you could have claimed me as salvage under galactic law. Now you offer further assistance when your obligation is complete. I do not understand your motivations." Marcus started packing up his tools, considering how to explain something that felt as natural as breathing. "My grandmother used to fix injured animals when I was a kid. Birds with broken wings, cats that had been hit by vehicles, sometimes larger creatures that wandered onto our farm. She taught me that once you start helping someone, you don't stop halfway through just because the paperwork's done." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise individual." "She was. She's also the one who taught me that being different isn't the same as being broken." Marcus gestured toward the dragon's pale scales. What the Zephyrians called defective, she would have called unique. And unique things are usually the most interesting. Shimmer of Stars on Water moved closer to Marcus, lowering his great head until they were at eye level. "You speak of my condition as though it were not shameful." "Shameful?" Marcus shook his head. "Look at yourself. Really look. Those scales aren't just white. They're translucent. I can see the way light moves through them, creating patterns that change as you move. A normal dragon might be beautiful, but you're like a living crystal sculpture." "How is that shameful?" The dragon was quiet for a long time, processing this radically different perspective on his appearance. The Zephyrians said I was a genetic failure, that my bloodline was corrupted. The Zephyrians say a lot of things, Marcus replied, opening a supply crate from his ship. Most of them designed to make other species feel inferior. That's how they maintain their position as the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. But I've worked on enough of their equipment to know that their definition of perfection is pretty narrow. He pulled out a medical scanner and approached the dragon carefully. Mind if I check those wounds? Some of them look infected. An infection doesn't care how genetically pure someone is supposed to be. Shimmer of stars on water allowed Marcus to examine the injuries where the chains had rubbed against his hide. The human's scanner wasn't designed for dragon physiology, but it could identify basic problems like inflammation and bacterial contamination. Good news and bad news, Marcus announced after completing his scan. Good news is that none of these wounds are life-threatening if we treat them properly. Bad news is that they're going to need more than basic first aid. You need proper medical facilities and time to heal. Where would we find such facilities? Dragons are not common in this part of the galaxy, and most medical centers are operated by species that consider us dangerous predators. Marcus smiled. That's where being human comes in handy. We've got a reputation for taking care of things that other species write off as too dangerous or too difficult. There's a human medical station in the Vega system, place called Haven Point. They specialize in treating unusual cases, and their chief medical officer used to be a xenobiologist before she went into medicine. You would take me there? Even though harboring me might cause diplomatic problems with the Zephyrians? Let me worry about the Zephyrians, Marcus said, already planning the journey. Besides, technically you're not being harbored. You're free to go wherever you want. And if you happen to want to go to Haven Point, well, that's just your choice as a free individual. While Marcus prepared his ship for departure, he couldn't help but notice how the dragon was testing his newfound freedom. Shimmer of stars on water stretched his wings carefully, turned his head from side to side, and took tentative steps around the cargo bay. Each movement was deliberate and cautious, as though he was afraid the chains might somehow reappear. Question, Marcus said as he calibrated his ship's medical bay for dragon physiology. What do dragons actually eat? The ship's records show they were feeding you some kind of processed nutrient paste, but I'm guessing that's not your natural diet. In the wild, my people consume large fish from deep mountain lakes, certain mineral-rich stones, and occasionally the aurora flowers that grow only in the highest peaks of our home world, the dragon replied. The paste maintained life but provided no satisfaction. Marcus checked his food stores and grinned. Well, I don't have aurora flowers, but I've got some high-grade protein supplements and mineral tablets that might be more appealing than paste. And once we reach Haven Point, they'll be able to synthesize a proper dragon diet. As they prepared to transfer to Marcus's ship, the dragon paused at the entrance to the Zephyrian vessel. Should we not inform someone that I am no longer here? The distress beacon is still broadcasting. Already taken care of, Marcus replied, showing his handheld scanner. I modified the beacon to indicate that the salvage operation was completed successfully. Anyone who intercepts it will assume another Zephyrian crew already claimed you. You are remarkably thorough for someone who claims to be just a mechanic. Good mechanics have to be thorough. Things break when you cut corners, and broken things can get people killed. Marcus sealed the airlock behind them as they boarded the wrench turner. Besides, I figure if you're going to do something, you might as well do it right. The journey to Haven Point would take 4 days, which would give Marcus time to properly assess the dragon's condition and begin treatment for the worst of his injuries. As they settled into the ship's cargo bay, the only space large enough for shimmer of stars on water, Marcus found himself looking forward to the challenge. One more question, he said, as he programmed their course. What do you want to do once you're healed? The galaxy's a big place, and now you're free to go anywhere you choose. The dragon considered this question with the same careful attention he'd given everything else. I do not know, he said finally. For so long, my choices were made by others who saw me only as a problem to be solved or disposed of. The concept of self-determination is overwhelming. That's okay, Marcus assured him. You've got time to figure it out, and if you want some advice from someone who's made his share of wrong turns, the best way to figure out what you want to do is to start by figuring out who you want to be. As the wrench turner engaged its faster-than-light drive and began the journey toward human space, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this rescue was just the beginning of something much larger. The dragon was more than just another being in need of help. He was a symbol of everything wrong with the galaxy's power structures and everything right with the human approach to solving problems. The Zephyrians had seen genetic imperfection where humans saw unique beauty. They had chosen abandonment where humans chose rescue. Most importantly, they had seen a disposable subject where humans saw an individual worthy of freedom and respect. Marcus fell asleep that night to the sound of the dragon's steady breathing, a sound that no longer carried notes of pain, but something approaching contentment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, it was enough that Shimmer of Stars on Water was breathing freely in a place where his differences were seen as gifts rather than flaws. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus despite the shared surname, had seen a lot of unusual patients during her 15 years at Haven Point Medical Station. The facility specialized in treating species that most medical centers either couldn't or wouldn't handle. But even by Haven Point's standards, watching a 40-foot dragon emerge from a mechanic's cargo hold was something new. Well, she said to Marcus as Shimmer of Stars on Water carefully maneuvered through the enlarged docking bay, when you called ahead and said you were bringing in an unusual case, you weren't exaggerating. Wait until you get a good look at him, Marcus replied, keeping pace with the dragon as they moved toward the medical wing. The Zephyrians had him chained in a cargo bay for 6 months because they decided his albinism made him defective. Dr. Chen stopped walking. They what? You heard right. Abandoned him to die because he didn't match their genetic ideal. Marcus's voice carried an edge that made several nearby medical staff look up from their duties. By the time I found him, he was maybe a month away from organ failure. The doctor's expression shifted from surprise to professional anger, the kind that medical personnel developed when confronted with preventable suffering. How's his condition now? Stable, but he needs proper treatment. I've been doing what I can with basic medical supplies, but some of those chain wounds need specialized care, and he's severely malnourished. Dr. Chen nodded, already switching into treatment mode. We'll start with a full diagnostic scan, then develop a comprehensive recovery plan. How's his psychological state? Marcus glanced at the dragon, who was examining the medical station's corridors with quiet fascination. Better than you might expect. He's stronger than the Zephyrians gave him credit for, but he's still processing the idea that someone might actually value him for who he is, rather than in spite of it. The medical examination took 3 hours and revealed the full extent of what the Zephyrians had dismissed as genetic deficiency. Shimmer of Stars on Water's albinism hadn't just affected his coloration. It had created a unique internal structure that was actually more efficient than normal dragon physiology in several key areas. His pale scales were more flexible and better at regulating temperature. His translucent wing membranes could detect air pressure changes that normal dragons missed entirely. This is fascinating, Dr. Chen told Marcus as they reviewed the scan results. What the Zephyrians saw as flaws are actually evolutionary advantages. His respiratory system is more efficient, his bone density is optimized for his specific body weight, and his neural pathways show enhanced pattern recognition capabilities. So he's not defective? He's not just not defective, he's exceptional. This level of integrated genetic variation doesn't happen by accident. It's the kind of adaptive mutation that drives species evolution. She paused, looking at the data with professional admiration. The Zephyrians didn't abandon a flawed dragon. They abandoned what might be the next step in dragon development. While the medical team worked to treat his physical injuries, Shimmer of Stars on Water found himself experiencing something he'd never encountered before, being valued for his abilities rather than judged for his appearance. The human medical staff showed genuine curiosity about his condition, asking questions about how his enhanced senses affected his perception of the world. "Your wing membranes are incredibly sensitive," one of the technicians observed during a routine examination. "You must be able to detect weather patterns from much farther away than other dragons." "I had not considered it an advantage," the dragon replied, still adjusting to the idea that his differences might be beneficial. "On my homeworld, I was often mocked for flinching at storms that others could not yet sense. That wasn't oversensitivity," the technician explained patiently. "That was early warning. In a dangerous environment, being able to detect threats before others can sense them is a survival advantage." These conversations were having a profound effect on how Shimmer of Stars on Water viewed himself. Each day at Haven Point brought new revelations about capabilities he'd been taught to see as weaknesses. His pale coloration wasn't a flaw. It was perfect camouflage for certain environments. His enhanced hearing wasn't hypersensitivity. It was superior threat detection. Marcus watched this transformation with satisfaction, but he wasn't surprised when the complications arrived. They came in the form of a Zephyrian diplomatic vessel that appeared in the Haven Point system exactly 1 week after their arrival. The Zephyrian ambassador, a tall figure named High Coordinator Veltar, was everything Marcus had come to expect from the species: elegant, condescending, and absolutely certain of their own superiority. The meeting took place in Haven Point's diplomatic conference room, with Marcus, Dr. Chen, and Station Commander Admiral Torres representing the human side. "The creature you are harboring," Veltar began without preamble, "is stolen property of the Zephyrian Colonial Authority. We demand its immediate return." Admiral Torres leaned back in her chair with the expression of someone who'd dealt with too many diplomatic ultimatums to be impressed by another one. "According to our records, the individual in question was abandoned in a derelict vessel broadcasting a distress signal. That makes him either salvage or a rescue case, depending on how you look at it. The creature was contained for the safety of our crew and the stability of our research mission," Veltar replied smoothly. "Its removal from our vessel was unauthorized theft." Marcus had been quiet during the formal exchanges, but now he leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Funny thing about that research mission of yours. I had a chance to review your ship's logs before we left. Want to know what I found?" The Zephyrian's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught the slight hesitation before he replied. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Your logs show that Shimmer of Stars on Water was classified as experimental material rather than a sentient passenger. The feeding schedule you maintained was calculated to keep him alive but weakened. And the distress beacon? That wasn't broadcasting his location for rescue. It was advertising him for sale to whoever wanted to claim him as cargo." Dr. Chen added her own evidence to the growing pile. "Our medical examination revealed systematic malnourishment consistent with deliberate deprivation. This wasn't containment for safety reasons. It was torture." "Furthermore," Admiral Torres said, producing a datapad, "according to Galactic Accord 7B, any sentient being held against their will has the right to claim sanctuary with any signatory species. Humanity is a signatory. The individual has requested sanctuary. Case closed." Veltar's composure finally cracked slightly. "The creature is genetically flawed. It cannot survive without specialized care that only Zephyrian science can provide." "Actually," Dr. Chen interjected with professional satisfaction, "our analysis indicates that his genetic variations make him more resilient than baseline dragon physiology, not less. He doesn't need specialized care. He needed to be treated with basic medical competence and respect." The diplomatic meeting continued for another hour, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Zephyrians had no legal claim on Shimmer of Stars on Water, and their moral authority had been thoroughly demolished by the evidence of their treatment. They departed with threats of diplomatic consequences that everyone in the room knew were empty. After the Zephyrians left, Marcus found the dragon in Haven Point's observation lounge, looking out at the stars through the massive, transparent aluminum windows. "How do you feel about all that?" Marcus asked, settling into a chair that had been modified to accommodate visitors of various sizes. "Free," the dragon replied without hesitation, but also confused. "For so long, I believed what they told me about my condition, about my worth. Now I discover that their assessment was not only wrong but deliberately harmful. How do I reconcile these opposing truths?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "My grandmother used to say that the truth is like light. It doesn't change just because someone points it in a different direction. The truth about you hasn't changed. You were always exceptional. The only thing that changed was finding people who could see it clearly. And what do I do with this knowledge? That's up to you. You're free to go anywhere. Do anything you want. What does your heart tell you?" The dragon was quiet for a long time, watching the stars wheel slowly past the observation windows. "I think," he said finally, "that I would like to help others who have been told they are defective when they are merely different. There must be others like me, beings who have been discarded by societies that value conformity over innovation." Marcus smiled. "Funny you should mention that. Dr. Chen was just telling me about a proposal she's been working on. Haven Point wants to expand their mission to include advocacy for what she calls genetic diversity preservation. They need someone with first-hand experience of how genetic differences can actually be advantages. They would want someone like me for such work? They would want exactly someone like you. Who better to help others understand that different doesn't mean defective than someone who's proven it through lived experience?" 3 months later, Shimmer of Stars on Water had become Haven Point's first genetic diversity advocate, working with beings from across the galaxy who had been marginalized because of genetic variations. His pale scales and enhanced senses, once seen as shameful flaws, were now symbols of resilience and adaptation. The work was deeply satisfying. He counseled other albino individuals from various species, helped researchers understand the advantages that genetic variations could provide, and most importantly, served as living proof that the galaxy's definition of normal was far too narrow. Marcus visited whenever his salvage routes brought him through the system. On one such visit, he found the dragon working with a group of young aliens whose genetic differences had made them outcasts in their home societies. "You know," Marcus said as they watched Shimmer of Stars on Water patiently explain to a young Centaurian with unusual coloration that her differences made her more interesting, not less valuable. "I think my grandmother would have liked you. I wish I could have met her. She sounds like someone who understood the value of seeing clearly." Marcus nodded, thinking about the chain of events that had brought them to this moment. A distress signal that most people would have ignored. A dragon written off as defective by one of the galaxy's most advanced species. A human mechanic who believed that everyone deserved a chance to prove their worth. "The galaxy's a big place," Marcus said, "full of people who need someone to believe in them. Good thing there are beings like you working to make sure that happens." Shimmer of Stars on Water turned those pale red eyes toward Marcus with an expression of profound gratitude. "Good thing there are beings like you willing to take the first step, even when the outcome is uncertain." As Marcus prepared to depart for his next salvage mission, he reflected on what they'd accomplished. The Zephyrians had seen genetic imperfection where humans saw adaptive advantage. They had chosen abandonment where humans chose rescue. Most importantly, they had discarded what they couldn't understand where humans chose to learn and appreciate. The dragon was thriving, not because humans had fixed him, but because humans had recognized that he was never broken in the first place. Sometimes the most revolutionary act was simply refusing to accept someone else's definition of worthless. The wrench turner departed Haven Point with Marcus's usual mixed cargo of salvage and supplies, but this time he carried something extra: the knowledge that sometimes the most valuable things in the galaxy were the ones that other people had thrown away. And sometimes the most important repair work wasn't fixing broken machines, but mending broken spirits by showing them they had never been damaged at all. In his wake, Shimmer of Stars on Water continued his work, helping other defective beings discover their own exceptional nature. The galaxy was slowly learning that diversity wasn't a flaw to be corrected, but a strength to be celebrated. And it had all started with one human mechanic who believed that everyone deserved a chance to prove their worth.